Once I stood at the foot of a great high mountain that I wanted so much to climb. And on top of this mountain was a beautiful fountain, and beside it the tree of life. I fell down on my knees at the foot of this mountain, cried out, Odin, what must I do? I want to climb up and see, want to learn from this tree that grows so clear in my view. Then I heard a great voice from the top of this mountain saying, child, these are my rules. Just start with Viiiibes and climb on upward between the etheric and root. Started climbing upwards, taking Odin's advice, and the higher I got, the harder I climbed. I'm still climbing upwards, and the journey never ends. But through symbiosis, I farm and live free, climbing higher each day by the alchemist way. So friend, if you're willing, climb this mountain with me. Oh, the cuckoo, she's a pretty bird. She warbles as she flies. She never hollers cuckoo till the 4th day July. Gonna build me a log cabin on a mountain so high, so I can see Willie as he goes on by. I play cards in England, and I play cards in Spain. I'll bet you $10 I'll beat you this game. My wagon, well green, and my whip's in my hand. Step aside, little woman, my horses won't stand. Jack and Jack and I've known you from old. You robbed my poor pockets of my silver and my gold. Oh, cuckoo, she's a pretty bird. She warbles as she flies. She'll cause you no trouble, and she'll tell you no lies.
Hail, and welcome to Odin's Alchemy. Today we have the great pleasure of welcoming Chance. Chance is the host of InnerVerse. If you haven't watched InnerVerse, I'm kind of shocked because I talk about it fairly regularly. And the last time that I talked to Chance and I had a brainstorm of epiphanies, and we only make the show 2 hours, so we wanted to give it a little break, come back and see where both of us are landing and where our heads are in between then, and see if we can't continue that magic. And with that, Chance, why don't you go ahead and tell everybody where to find you, just in case they can't figure it out, and kick it off, brother.
Hey, thanks for having me on, Ben. Definitely been looking forward to this, because since we last spoke, and the topic for everyone's memory is that we discussed the world tree or the cosmic egg as a flat earth cosmology. And then we found a lot of interesting insights about that when comparing it to electric universe as a theory. So the highlight for me was, I think maybe other people have caught on to this before because it just makes sense when you know about these things. But we puzzled up the idea that possibly Ragnarok is an electrolysis event and generates the sludge like the Brown's gas machine and creates that mud or extra land. And so since we talked about a month ago or however long ago it was, maybe a little longer, I've been just opened up to the mystery of this cosmic egg and of cosmology and of maybe other. I wanted to know, like, what else could this connect to? Because when we deal in the realm of the esoteric and the metaphysical, well, just the one straightforward answer of what it is we mean when we're talking about a subject, like the symbolism of the egg, well, since life in reality is a huge fractal, there's way more to it than just looking at it as the realm itself. There's all up and down the fractal of life force energy. This dynamic would need to demonstrate itself. Otherwise, it's probably not accurate. And so in recent conversations with various people on my show and other shows, the further insights have just been falling out of the sky into my lap as I go. And it's really led me on a pretty wild ride that I'm excited to try to summarize with you today. I've got a slideshow and we'll see what we can get into.
Fantastic.
It might be too much, but we'll do our best.
It will not be too much. Definitely not.
Just too much for maybe one
I
show. We'll see if we can fit it in.
Yeah, jump right in, brother. Everybody's heard the model that I've been working on, and after you're done with what you're talking about, I will lay out a few epiphanies, a few things that I figured out and worked on, and
if they can,
we'll
if you
just
can weave them
collaborate.
in with my presentation, that'd be great. It'd be cool to kind of just weave. So just pop in if you have a thought about something I'm
100%.
discussing. And
100%.
also, I didn't say, you can find my stuff at InnerVersePodcast.com. I'm also on YouTube and Rockfin and BitChute and Odyssey. And of course, like your standard audio RSS feed playing podcast catchers. Best place to watch my show would be Rockfin because they actually support. And, you know, Ben already has told you guys about that. So InnerVersePodcast.com is where you find my show and find the other things I'm up to besides just the main podcast. But yeah, Jared will bring up the first slide. We can kind of kick off with the opening thoughts here. This is a few quotes from the poet William Blake, where he says, first, the imagination is not a state. It is the human existence itself. So that is a huge, huge statement that we'll hopefully be able to reflect on as we go. I just want to put that idea in your mind. He's also saying, imagination is the real and eternal world of which this vegetable universe is but a faint shadow. And he says, finally, if the doors of perception were cleansed, everything would appear to man as it is, infinite. And on the right here is just a artwork from his great works of epic poetry about the fall of Albion. And he had some very interesting cosmology. He was one of those artists that created his own system, and you can learn a lot about a lot about life and the dynamics of the positive and negative, and the yin and the yang, and the masculine and the feminine, the real and the artificial, by studying William Blake, which I admittedly haven't studied as much as I could. I'm just definitely a fan of what I do know, and these quotes are important to kick us off because what we're going to be diving into in terms of cosmology and metaphysical mythology has a lot to do with the imagination, because without the imagination, you wouldn't be able to see how these things connect up and down the fractal. And as I've heard you say, Ben, there's more to the world than just the carbon lock stuff that we perceive on this level of density, or whatever you want to describe it, this dimension. Life force energy is the thing in the cosmos that is one, and that's like the ether or the electricity that's
I'm going to drive
flowing
north a little bit, honey.
So that's like,
well, then you got to put Odin in. He's going to try and
that Jotun's attacking. Very, very hardcore. But yeah, the imagination is that life force energy flow as well. I believe personally that what we perceive through our imagination is in every sense as real as anything else, and that's why we can connect with ancestors in the dream. That's why we can pull things out of the infinite with our creative acts and creative capacities that reflect life and nature, even though we may not have known consciously what it was that we were reflecting. It's the idea of channeling, I guess, but you can find out real things by using your imagination. So it's really a better way of maybe describing this in a simple statement is that imagining is not a form of thinking. All forms of thinking are imagination. It's the primary ground of all existence. It's when you talk about source, when you're the source of something, you originate it, you made it up. And in the sense of the God or the All-Father or source in this reality that we find ourselves in, the larger mind that we are small vessels carrying a portion of, that larger mind, that source is also itself dreaming or imagining or making things up as it goes in a very creative, artistic flow state that we are really well off to emulate as human beings. So that's kind of my introduction to the whole topic. And I really like this particular artwork that is shown on the right here, because these realms that are labeled here, they're part of his creative cosmology that he came up with. But it's interesting that the sort of egg shape is right there in the middle, and it makes me wonder like what else I could pull out of his works. But let me see what is on the next slide. Yeah, let's just go ahead and look at the next slide too. These are just some depictions of Yggdrasil, the world tree, Yggdrasil. And I wanted to bring these images up into our minds before we proceed forward, because I think on the left here, this is very similar to the idea of a cosmic egg. I do not have a personal difference or beef between the idea of a world tree or a cosmic egg. I think they are just two metaphors for describing the same thing, which is what Ben calls the galvanic battery system that we are a part of, this closed realm, right? So
What?
if Ben, if you're in a good place and want to respond to any of this, then I'd love that, because on the right here, there's this Yggdrasil chart that shows the 9 realms, and that is pretty interesting to me. It's not something I'm nearly as adept at as you are, but I have found that as I've followed your work, that a lot of it makes great sense, like the gender switch from the Western esoteric canon to make the sun the more prominently feminine one and the moon the more masculine one. Plenty to say about this cosmological system that I find interesting is the Holy Trinity is a part of it. There's an upper world and a middle realm, which is the flat centerpiece, and then the lower realm. And these first divisions of consciousness represent the life, the birth, the life, and the death. And the other forms of this Trinity are found all over the place. Like you talk about with Odin, Vili, and Ve. There's the Father, Son, Holy Ghost, Jesus, Mary, and John. There's Brahma, Vishnu, and Shiva. Obviously, heaven and hell and earth, positive, negative, neutral, right? There's just angels, humans, demons, seraphim, cherubim, human. These holy trinities are symbolic to the foundational structure of the universe, the body, mind, spirit. So we will see probably a lot more representations of Trinity as we move forward, because that's just how the realm configures itself all the time. That's part of balance. That's part of the way life force energy flows. It's always in this interesting Trinity system that you can even pull out through numerological studies or gematria. Like an example would be the way, whenever you look at the Pythagorean tetractys, there's the digits 1 through 10, and they're listed out in a triangle. And each row is another trinity of sorts. And when you get to 4, you do addition from 1 plus 2 plus 3 plus 4, that equals 10 and creates another 1. And so it becomes the 1 of another 1, 2, 3, as in 4, 5, 6, and then 7 is the 1 of another trinity, because 1 plus 2 plus 3 plus 4 plus 5 plus 6 plus 7 is 28, which reduces to a 1. So every 3 digits, you get another number that, through what they call theosophical addition, reduces back to 1. And so the whole sequence of numbers from 1, 2, 3, and then 4, which is another 1, 5, 6, 7, 7 is another 1, 8, 9, 10, 10 is another 1. So you're getting basically 7, 8, 9 is a trinity, 10, 11, 12 is a trinity, 13, 14, 15 is a trinity. And this goes on because of this quality of numbers that every 3, 1, 4, 7, 10, 13, and etc., these numbers reduce to 1. So it's just trinities all the way up and down the scale of numerical reality and physical reality and the spiritual reality. And probably so much more to say about trinities, but it's a fun conversation just to have a detour into that. And even when you look at the Yggdrasil on the right here, it's got sets of trinity as well. There's, depending on which way you look at it, there's trinities across the middle, going up and down or left and right. If you feel me here, there's these because it's 9. And so that's part of the 369 mystery. We're going to get into more number stuff when we talk about solfeggio later, but to continue on, really get into the cosmic egg. This is a piece of artwork that I'm very fond of, created by a friend of mine named Hakan. And when Benjamin and I spoke on InnerVerse, we did a lot of looking at this image, but it was behind me. It's on this tapestry behind me. And that means it wasn't quite as clear to look at as it is in a screen share. So we're going to be able to take a deeper look at this image. And I'm not saying that it's the end all be all map of the realm, but perhaps metaphysically there's truth to this image. And that's part of why I brought out that quote at the beginning with William Blake about imagination and the doors of perception and viewing the infinite, because as I understand the story, Homeboy actually saw this structure of the realm because he went on a massive like psychedelic DMT journey and saw it from the outside. And so he's traveling in the astral realm or the imaginal through the use of a plant medicine. And he it's a funny story. He said that when he got like outside of this egg structure and was looking at it, there were these giant Cthulhu monsters, cephalopod demon, crazy like squid face things, and they're all scary and trying to freak him out, and they're like, we're gonna eat you. And he said his response to it was that he knew that everything is a part of him and that all life is one, and that whatever he was experiencing was something inside of himself and not separate and not therefore a danger or a threat. And as soon as he expressed this realization on his trip or his journey, the Cthulhu monster beings were just like, so what do you want to know? And he asked them about like, what am I looking at? And this is where he like channeled or downloaded in a very quick psychedelic journey, because DMT doesn't even last that long, this structure of the realm. So like, I don't know how you come up with something like this without there being a aspect of nature and harmony being expressed, because it's so amazing in terms of the complexity, but the symmetry and the beauty of this artwork. And to get into it, we're looking at something that flat earth people are probably very familiar with. In the middle lower section of the egg here is this thing that in ancient Egypt they referred to as the bin. It's this step pyramidal pyramidal structure, if you will, of these layers, like layers of a cake. And Ben and I talked about this on InnerVerse, but there's a potential. I mean, all of the cosmology that we're getting into when we're looking at different ways of viewing the realm because of accepting the flat earth and rejecting the ball and the globe, all of this becomes conjectural and hypothetical. And maybe even more than one thing can be metaphorically true or accurate at the same time. So these steps on the middle rings here that you're looking at are like the worlds, the realms. And the very middle realm where you see the Mercury symbol, that would actually be like akin to the Garden of Eden, because it exists along the spine of the world. It's closest to the middle of where the charge is coming from, out of the source, if you will. The top of the egg and the bottom of the egg would be like the positive, negative, anode, cathode type of thing, potentially. And that this whole system is actually multiple nested layers of like anode, cathode battery. And yeah, Ben and I talked about this a lot.
Well, it's multiple layers of polarization.
Exactly.
Anyways, for sure.
Multiple layers of polarization, and part of how it expresses is through the varied oscillations of the different, what we call planets, but what maybe are actually sun and moon anode cathode polarity binaries on different layers of the shell. And so just like there's rings of a tree, there's these rings in this conception of the world, and our ring would be the second one out from the middle. And then you'd have the Antarctic ice wall, if you will. And then I can actually pull up, since we're talking about this section of it, let me pull this up. So this is a little bit more of a zoom in. And yeah, our ring is where you see these like dancing people, if you will. And then further out, that would be the extraterrestrial lands or the other worlds. And in the next ring out, you have Mars and Venus as a sun and moon. And this is all conjectural, right? But I find that it's very harmonious, because when you look at the oscillatory patterns of these other luminaries that we call planets, when you look at them in comparison to how Apollo and Artemis, or sun and moon in our particular world, are actually oscillating, and like the pattern and design that it creates over time, if you were to draw it out like in a graph, like on a spirograph type of design, you would notice that they're cymatic patterns. The Venus makes the 5-pointed star, actually. The other luminaries have these cymatic patterns they're mapping out as well. And when you learn more about cymatics and how they relate to colors and frequencies and organs, and in the East and the Vedic systems, they call the chakras, then what you're looking at is potentially the original template of oscillation and movement that, on a fractal sense, either like generates or reflects in the as above, so below alchemical way, how these patterns express on other areas of the life energy spectrum. Like I said, as color, as organ systems, as frequencies and tones. That's going to be something we definitely talk about, because all these mysteries are there, especially in the classical tradition, whenever we start digging in and looking into the symbolism with a more critical eye. So there's way more conjecture that you can take just out of this image, or out of other conceptions of a world tree or cosmic egg. Like, it's interesting how maybe in this version, North is the center, and Polaris, in some sense, the North Star is the unchanging fixed point. And there's the Draco constellation that circles around the North Star. Very interesting possibilities in terms of how that has to mythologize down through the ages, with the serpent and the like Polaris, though, being the North Star. I feel like that could be, things need to be polarized for there to be a charge in the system, right? So Polaris, the North.
Absolutely.
North is an anagram for throne. It just doesn't have the E, but you could pronounce it that way. So that's potentially, like, as Marty Leeds has talked about, Polaris is like the throne of God or Christ, or the Mercury figure, the one that's in the middle. So I'm hearing a train there. Is that a train on your end? You about to hop on a train?
Yeah.
Oh, you're good, man. I just spoke to you. So the middle section,
it's apparently going to be everything today.
They're hitting us with everything in the kitchen sink. Well, I don't want to maybe go too deep into spending all our time just talking about unless there's specific things we want to focus on potential explanations of the cosmology, because there's so much about just this image we could learn about, and that maybe these other rings are very important for the previous ages. Like, there's an electric universe based theory that says Saturn at one point was in the middle and was the sun, right? And if this is at all true, the conceptualization we're talking about, where the rings expand with electrolysis events and new land is added, then perhaps at the beginning of the gestation period of this cell in the cosmic body of God, if you will, was that instead of Mercury being the both sun and moon androgynous luminary as it is in the middle ring now, that there was just the one ring world, and Saturn/Jupiter were one luminary, and they split in two. Kind of like you get that in the mythology of how Saturn spawns Jupiter, right? And then Jupiter becomes seen as greater. So with each successive electrolysis event or mud flood or new land growing in this structure, you would create a new ring world and new barrier. That the barrier is actually what they call the Van Allen radiation belts, what NASA tells us that we can't go through. Those, I think, are toroidal fields of electromagnetic energy in a strong density that constitute like what we experience maybe as a firmament, and that the sun and moon binaries of each ring world are actually traveling along or in some way guided by these toroidal fields, these electromagnetic Van Allen belts, they call it, that's very possible. Like there's so much that you can infer when you think about this and keep going with it. And at the end of the day, another way to conceive of it, though, is that it's not that it's just a vast clock, but it is a vast clock. So I've been looking at this particular image and the idea of the cosmic egg for a very long time, and specifically find it interesting that we're talking about in society a lot lately about escaping the matrix, and that they actually are handing us that idea as a good idea, that we want to get away from the matrix, get out of the matrix. But matrix actually means womb. And if the cosmos or the realm we're in is a sort of giant womb or an egg, then you wouldn't really want to get out of it until it was the right time to be born. And going back to this image, it's interesting that you have a being actually like ascending from the top, and there's these angelic, oops, I just skipped forward. I want to save that slide for a second, but there's these angelic beings to the left and right of it. And you see that symbolism a lot. You'll see it later in another slide from the Vatican. And anyway, escaping the matrix is kind of like saying escaping from nature. And what really, like with many of these words that we've been handed and told that they're bad words or demonize these concepts, it's maybe a better idea that we take them back and recognize that the truth in the words, instead of wanting to run away into artificial virtual realities and hop into artificial wombs, because that's what the socialization, the feminization, solarization of the world with this, what you would call Luciferic, not that I'm dogging on that symbol, because that's another one you could take back, but like what's described as a Luciferian false light luxury system where people are blinded and dazzled by the light, just in the same sense that we're told that we're going into an overly solarized period with global warming. And the interesting thing about that is that's also, by your conceptualization, it's a feminization of the realm. And we definitely see that with the men and the women of the realm, that being overly feminized, and actual masculinity is largely being lost. So we don't want to run away from the feminine either. We just want things in the right place, and to recognize that we're the whole earth, the whole realm is a type of a womb, and that it's always emanating the energies that we need for life. And if we can absorb that etherically, electrically, and we can learn to work with and harness these energies that are always present, instead of doing this thing like you and Mitch talked about on your recent episode, where everything's dirty electricity. We want to find a way to live in the harmonious version of ether and electricity and energy. But I found an interesting link in Gematria, because I am super curious about this whole idea of simulation theory. I don't subscribe to it, but like, why is this a thing? And I've done a lot of content on that in the past. And this is a slide from an older presentation I did on it. And I happened to notice that in Gematria, in the 4 basic ciphers that everyone uses, the words or the phrases God's child, cosmic egg, and video game all have an exact match across all 4 ciphers. And I thought, that's really bizarre. And then, of course, I had to throw in this image of Neo, and it looks like he's in kind of like an egg pod, an artificial womb of sorts. And the question is that then, is our reality, is life, like what I want to pose the question of, is life just a dream that you have while you're in a womb, preparing to be born into another life and another existence, and that's the reincarnation cycle? Not that this place isn't real, but just that life and death are portals from womb to womb, to different levels of wombs in a fractal sense, that when you're born into this realm, you're also incubating your next life in the following existence, if that makes sense. And then on and on it goes, like the idea of Russian nesting dolls. And because in every layer, our 3D experience, of the carbon lock experience, what we are doing in here as cells in a large body that have individuated consciousness as vessels, we're like the process and the story through which consciousness explains and expedites the whole process of life coming together, of life growing and developing, of the metamorphosis from the embryonic into the infant, and then into a larger form of life. So we're always, in a sense, incubating and expanding and growing life, and as individuals coming together and connecting and celebrating the healthy electricity and communicating and building, that is like akin to the parts of the embryonic stage of a baby coming together and growing into a larger, more capable life form. And so perhaps, like, we're all moving into a phase of, they say, becoming God, but I don't want to say becoming God or gods per se, but maybe like as individual experiences here, maybe we're like cells in a bigger body that then we could jump up in the scale to be born out of whatever womb this is. But that's all just like fun esoteric conjecture. I want to maybe move on, but if you feel good about chucking
Okay.
in here at any point, go for it.
Absolutely. Now that I actually can, and I'm going to have to really enjoy watching the first half hour of the show here and hearing I could only hear chunks of that. And now finally I'm in a spot where it said I had good bars, but it was very sketchy. I enjoy in that picture where you can see that it's two fields, where it almost looks like a black hole in the back, where it's actually, you can see that it's two fields. And even on the shell itself, there's one side's got one color, one side's got another color. And what you have happening there is that these particles between the anode and the cathode, that particle splits and travels across, and so you have a positive on one side and a negative on the other side, and that ends up creating an actual magnetic field also. So you've got an electric field and a magnetic field that are interlocking together and interplaying with each other. Absolutely wonderful. And then that field then becomes the feminine side of things, as opposed to where then the masculine side of things is that straight line dead center, where it takes in the masculine set of things. Yeah, this representation is just wonderful. I'm a Hakan Hassim. That this is
Yeah,
the
he's
way
a
he
guy from
found that.
Turkey. He's a Turkish artist.
That's fantastic.
It's pretty amazing. His other work is
Yeah,
good too, but this is just like mind blowing.
it really is. And then, yeah, we just live on the Mercury level. That's where our life is going to appear. I also found it very interesting, where outside of this, everything was very aquatic. This is the dark waters and the light waters. These waters are too intense for us to deal with. And then you look at Crowley with his Age of Horus figures, and Levi.
And you
Anytime
have the
you're looking
serpent
at
around the
that,
world tree too. The what's the serpent's
yep,
name again?
Jormungandr,
Right.
and it's always aquatic uh, creatures outside of the realm that you're dealing with.
Yeah,
Then
because
the
the
same thing,
space is the sea. The heavens
right?
are an ocean, and there's so much symbolism replete in the esoteric tradition to show that. And also find it interesting that snakes eat eggs, and so when an egg is cracked by outside pressure, life ends. But if an egg is cracked from within, life begins. And another interesting similarity just to electric universe and eggs is that eggs crack. And if you look at the pattern of an eggshell cracking, it is similar to lightning crackling. Lightning crackles, and you see
Yeah,
a similar sort of dendrite type pattern in an actual eggshell cracking as lightning in the sky. So there's just nonstop mirroring in nature to these ideas, and I think that's why the symbols are so potent.
absolutely, absolutely. And when you're looking at Yggdrasil, then when you're looking at the 9 planets or the 9 realms or the 9 worlds or however you're going to want to call it, you can lay those out just like the other artist did on the Cosmic Egg, where Midgard is going to be your Mercury, and then everything above Midgard, where you're going to have your Muspelheim, your Elfheim, your Svartalfheim, things like that, are going to be up above, or I mean, Asgard, Elfheim, and then everything that's below that is going to be then more dense, more like on this other picture where he's got the crystals down below, but he has more just the straight light up above. Where when you're looking at the feminine side's your radiant energy, your chaos, and then the masculine side is your structure, your crystal side, where you're going to get your body, your structuring from, your voltage for the amperage to flow. So just absolutely fascinating, fantastic stuff.
Yeah, it's fun.
Absolutely.
And I found, since we last talked, one thing that I found that was also really interesting was this passage from the Vindadad, I believe is how you pronounce it. It's a book in the Zoroastrian scripture, the Avesta. And so I highlighted a couple of passages from this chapter. And the god Yima, it says, Yima made the earth grow larger by 1/3 than it was before, and there came flocks and herds and men, and at their will and wish, as many as he wished. Now to back up a little bit, the reason why Yima made the earth grow larger than 1/3 than it was before, and then down in chapter or verse 19, he makes the earth grow larger than by 2/3 than it was before, was because the people were complaining that the earth has become full of flocks and herds of men and dogs and birds and of red blazing fires, and there's no more room for flocks, herds, and men. And then Yima, it says, Yima stepped forward in light southwards on the way of the sun. And afterwards he pressed the earth with the golden seal and bored it with the poignard, speaking thus, O Spenta, our mighty, kindly open asunder and stretch thyself afar to bear flocks and herds of men. So I'm not really familiar with the Zoroastrian cosmology, but I found that to be just a very
Well,
interesting.
I like that last part where so you look at Muspelheim, and gold is your your electricity, your sulfur, your energy. So, and then with the poignard, which is a long
I
straight
thought too,
sword.
it sounds just like the what you described as the Ragnarok event.
Yeah, where he's driving his sword through the 9 realms. And this would be the electrolysis event as opposed to the galvanic side of things. And during the electrolysis things, the batteries recharging, things are getting better consistently throughout that entire cycle. Uh, Absolutely fascinating. I'm not a real familiar with Zoroastrianism uh, either, outside of the what most people have heard. Um, that's fantastic. And then the deluge. So the water has to come after the fire, and then everything gets replenished, and there's room again, and the same life that was there just comes crawling right up out of the sand, out of the soil, and reappears again. And absolutely fantastic. And then also, when I was looking at the yuga cycles from the Hindu side of things, when you're looking at it, if you take it and look at it as basically a battery charge cycle, and realize that battery, say above 80%, everything works pretty good. It works real good. That you can consider that your gold side, whether it's in the recharge or the galvanic where it's depleting. Either way, that gold side where the battery's above 80% is one thing, and then when the battery's in between 80 and say 70, it doesn't work real good. and so on and so forth, all the way down to the Kali Yuga. And in between the Kali Yuga and the gold side, there is an exact perfect vertical line where you could see where the switch would get flipped. You know, the battery's too depleted to run it now. Now we need to flip it. And it would go through the other side of the cycle. And then when it got to its capacity, you flip it again, and now it goes through the degradatory cycle. So absolutely fantastic.
Now, while we were talking, I just happened to notice another pattern in this that I didn't even notice the first time I was looking this over, but there's actually, I only highlighted 2, but there's actually 3 lines here where he makes the earth grow larger. And each time before, like if you look at verse 8, it says, thus under the sway of Yima, 300 winters passed away. And then it goes on talking about the earth being replenished with flocks and herds and etc. until there's no more room. And then he makes the earth grow. And then it says, under the sway of Yima, 600 winters passed away, and the process repeats. And then the third time, it had been 900 winters. So we have a 369 encoded into this process. I think that that's fascinating, and that's going to come into 369 is definitely going to come into play later in what we're talking about. But I also have this artwork. Interesting that it's also divided in thirds in a way. I cannot recall who the artist is here, but on this represents the birth, life, and death, which is the Holy Trinity, and it's a component of everything that actually works and exists. Just like you were saying, the charge is stronger at the beginning, then it goes steady but less strong, and then it's fully decayed, right? There's that even applies to the battery. But on the left here, you have like Garden of Eden, metaphorically, Adam and Eve with just the animals. And then in the middle panel, it's when everything's growing and expanding and filling up with life. And then on the right, where everything's depleted. And there's even like what looks like a broken egg in here. It's a very weird artwork, but super interesting. Hieronymus Bosch, Jared says. That's exactly right. Thank you for that.
Yeah, makes sense. Makes sense.
So that's just I like to look at the classic art for information, because I do think that they encoded way more than we give them credit for, and they probably knew way more than we give them credit for, because the art survived. The history and the story of the history, that's one thing, but this art, like there it is. It tells a story for sure.
And the same thing is going to apply to any land that you move to. As soon as you start filling it up, if you get too big a herd of cattle and you don't have enough range, you've got to have so many acres per cow, or else the cow is just going to walk everything right into the ground, eat everything alive. Before you know it, all of a sudden there's not enough plant life to sustain life, and everything just kind of moves on to this next area. Fantastic. Very interesting that he has about the same amount of plant life in the second picture.
Supporting way
I'd
more
say
animal life. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's very interesting. You wouldn't think that that's quite, but again, just an artist representation. And then in the third one,
there's so much wild stuff going on in these 3 pictures, though. Like we could just look at this for a long time.
Absolutely. Yeah, very interesting. And then obviously in the third, you stopped growing, you've stopped. And the same thing, it's not just the birth, death, and life, because somewhere in that middle phase, in that middle panel, you're going to stop growing. You're going to quit expanding, and from that point on, you are going to start contracting, and that's decay. So that decay really starts at that dead center point. It just doesn't really become a problem until you get to that last third panel, which you'd say that
It's kind of like how birth is a short phase, life is a huge journey, and death is a short phase, the way that the panels are divided here.
yeah. Well, and then it's interesting.
Yeah, it's super interesting artwork. And now, if we can move on from this, I want to look at some more imagery of what could be the cosmic egg. Now, on the right is the famous so-called pine cone that's at the courtyard at the Vatican. And I'm not disputing that a pine cone is an appropriate symbol for this image. I could have maybe found better, but on the left here, or as far as pictures, but on the left here is they call these in London pineapples, and they're on the top of these cathedrals and different ancient architecture that is, we're probably 100% lied to about the origins of the ancient architecture. But your tour guide in London will tell you this is pineapples, and that there's like this whole stupid story about pineapples being what they were depicting because they just recently brought them to Britain, and it's really dumb. And the fact is, this actual symbol is, in my opinion, I guess I say the fact is, but I think that there's a strong case to be made that this is actually the egg. It's the cosmic egg. It's the Orphic egg in many different names, but it's also scaly egg. It's a scaled egg. And
well, it's very interesting because have you heard my theory on Christian origins with
like
Adam
to.
and Eve?
Let's go for it.
So obviously in Egypt, Palestine, Israel, there's not a lot of apple trees. It just doesn't really happen out in desert regions and things too much. But pineapples, when you're talking about lush, tropical, they don't have to do anything. So pineapples, which would be your pineal apple, and the feminine always goes first. She makes the move that unlocks the masculine. So of course, then she unlocks it. She reaches up. You've got the pineal apple or the pineapple, which again is for the region is
symbolized with gold on the left here.
Yeah. And then you look at a pineapple. That's that's gold. And it also is going to have this same, very similar to this to the pine cone shape where it has the little spikes and everything else.
The Vatican
so I've always
peacocks to the left and right, which, just to make a quick callback to this image, he included the angelic cherubim on the left and right up here, or seraphim, if you will, whichever it might be. So there's this is also on the Ark of the Covenant. You see this symbolism of like the two birds or winged creatures to the left and right of the pine cone or the pineapple or the scaly egg.
Right. Yeah, which if you look at it, so like if we take and make this Hermes staff, what we can do is here we can make the cross, the top of the cross right here. The birds are sitting right on top of the horizontal line, and then the vertical line then extends down below what we can see by quite a bit. So this is just representing basically the top portion of things, where you've got the wings coming out to the side. You've got the sun there basically in the center, or that golden circle there in the center, the wings coming out to the sides. You can see the symbology there. We got a bunch of little men underneath there too.
Yeah. But before I move forward talking about Christianity, because I mean, maybe you have more to say about that. The next slides are actually definitely more on the Christian tradition. Because look at this Pope hat. Every Pope actually has one of these special, it's not the fish hat that you normally see. They don't wear this every day, but every Pope actually has a unique one of these manufactured for themselves. And I think they call it the papal tiara, but it's always egg shaped. It's always layered in these 3 layers, which is very pertinent. And here's some more images of it right here. There's different ones. So this symbol is replete throughout the Christian tradition, and we're going to get into maybe some more, or we're definitely into some more classical art and Catholic stuff that demonstrates the symbolism that we're talking about here. Because of course, at least in my opinion, these guys just scavenged the heathen traditions and the real gnosis of the people that were there before these empire parasites took over.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Very interesting what not on this set of pictures, but on the first one, you can see that the quite a bit of use of lapis lazuli. Um, there's citrine going on there.
Yeah, I think ruby and emerald.
Yep. Yep.
Good guess.
Yep. So interesting choices that they're making. When you look at anytime you're looking at the older esoteric things, like you can find old shields, things like that. They were very specific about which jewels they had worked into there. It's not like they were not aware that this really kind of looks aesthetically, it's kind of gaudy in all reality. And the same thing when you look at like Hindu jewelry and things like that, where it's got like the big chunks of red coral, um, things like that with the different spinels, and it's just really gaudy. Well, this gaudiness is because it wasn't really for aesthetics so much.
So gaudy is not the same as god-y, that they're playing
Right,
it off like they're the god people.
right, no doubt. So you can see that he's basically turning his head into the what would be the golden circle at the top, where the pineal right here would be where the cross is. So this would be, and then the wings would come off to the side right there.
Yeah,
So
it's
now that
almost
makes
like
me,
symbolic of the one wearing this as the mediator to everyone else's a connection to the source or the imagination, the god, the ether god.
oh, and doesn't he have look at that, little wings coming out the side right there, right out
Yeah, there
there.
are those like those tassels or whatever you want to call it, that
Yeah,
fabric. Yeah, it's very,
yeah,
very specific symbolism. You know, they don't
yes,
just
it is.
they don't they don't just hire someone to do whatever. But yeah, should I move forward with this some more?
Yep, absolutely.
Okay, we're doing pretty well. In terms of like
Mostly because I couldn't talk for the first half hour, so that made
yeah,
things go smoothly.
that actually might have been that might have been a good thing to help us actually finish the slideshow, you know, which I think I was a little concerned with, and maybe that I'd overdone it, but going forward, here is just a few examples of, if you look up Mary with an egg, it's replete. And if she's not holding the egg, oftentimes it's somewhere in the background and shown with her. And also sometimes the egg is red, which I wanted to point out when you were discussing the different gems that are on the papal tiara. The symbolism of color is highly significant, and it's something that Crow's gotten into before. We're having some interesting discussions about that in my Telegram channel today, because I posted these images and I was like, so why the red? And that led me to a pretty cool revelation that I'll get to. But she's shown with the egg constantly, and even on the right, on the far right, there's the pointing the finger upwards like this, and
Hmm.
that is representing or connecting to John the Baptist, actually. And so there's further Templar related mysteries with John the Baptist. You've got to wonder why, like, both Trump and Fresh Prince of Smell Hair, the current actor of the CEO of the United States Federal Corporation, right? Uncle Hairsniff, he's also going to both him and Trump go to like John the Baptist themed or like related churches. And this goes back to Templarism, and it's a long history of mystery about maybe some of these sects actually put the John the Baptist character in the place of Jesus. And there's a whole rabbit hole to go into with that. And
Well,
that's
and then
not
there's
really
that whole rabbit hole that says that the Templars actually only follow John the Baptist, and they hate Jesus because
right.
he went outside of the bounds of the teachings and gave it to people that were not initiated. And so they still follow John the Baptist and have an issue with Jesus himself.
Yeah, that's exactly, that's what I was alluding to, and I find that really interesting because the John the Baptist character is just going to come up as we go forward. I'll just say that. But here's another image of Mary with Jesus and John the Baptist on the left, and you got to wonder why. I don't know who the artist is of this image, but it's quite a fascinating one because you have what seem like multiple cultures and eras or time periods represented in one. And it makes me think that there may be some sort of like nod to the previous world civilization that people call Tartaria, that maybe in the sense of the like false chronology that we've been given, that it's possible that many mythological stories that we get from supposedly different eras or time periods or places are actually the same story that's just had the names and the characters changed so that it can be repeated and feel like it has the ring of truth to people's ancestral cultural memory. But actually we're talking about a much shorter span of time. We're talking about one set of characters, like that Jesus and John the Baptist possibly could be another version of Isaac and Esau from the Old Testament, and about who deserves the inheritance and who's hijacking the inheritance. Very interesting question, because if you equated John the Baptist with Esau, is wearing these animal fur skins, which is part of that story in the Old Testament. That anyway, we won't go too far into that particular tangent. That's a huge tangent. But on the left here, there's it's kind of small, but there's a golden, scaly, egg-shaped chalice. And like I said, this is encoded in all kinds of artwork, esoterically encoded, that pertains to Mary, Jesus, and John. Moving forward, here's another one where Mary is holding the red egg and she has this golden chalice. And so, of course, we're thinking Holy Grail here, right? And I'm going to read from the poem Holy Grail by Alfred Lord Tennyson, where he says, "And down the long beam stole the Holy Grail, rose red with beatings in it, as if alive, till all the white walls of my cell were dyed, with rosy colors leaping on the wall. And then the music faded, and the Grail passed, and the beam decayed, and from the walls the rosy quiverings died into the night." So there's so many things in just this short passage. First of all, I just threw in here the etymology of the word beam, which originally meant living tree, but then went on to mean a rafter, post, or ship's timber. And then also later on, it went on to represent a beam of light. But why I bring this passage up is because we're talking about womb metaphors. The egg is a type of gestation. It's when you're inside your mother's womb, you're coming out of the egg, metaphorically. You're growing from an egg, or you started as an egg. And in this poetry, the long beam, down the long beam stole the Holy Grail. I believe the Holy Grail could potentially have to do with the blood. And there's some many traditions in the heathen world and in the esoteric sects of Christianity and the weird offshoots and secret societies like Templars that have to do with drinking the menstrual blood. And the Grail as a chalice symbol could have to do with holding the menstrual blood, and that's why it's gold. As you said, they're esoterically encoding that the gold is actually the feminine, the solar is feminine. And of course, they've given us the inverted version of that to throw us off of understanding anything, right? That's how it always works.
Well, and what I'm finding fascinating in this poem, if you've ever incubated your own eggs, which I've done plenty of times, when you start out, you take the egg and you go into a dark room and you check it out with an egg light. You make sure there's no cracks and everything's all good. And the egg yolk, or the whole thing's basically white, the whole shell. When you shine the light through it, it's all white, everything's clear. And then as soon as life starts appearing inside of that, it gets veins. Bright red veins will start crawling across the entire inside of that shell.
Right,
And
rosy
then the
colors
whole thing
leaping on the wall, right? That's what it
Yes.
says in this poem.
That's what I'm saying. So that really brought to mind as I'm watching, like I said, an egg incubating, that sequence of events happening uh, inside the egg. Very interesting.
Yeah. So now here's where hold on to your hats, because we're like, this is where we start making some maybe it'll feel like bigger jumps, but maybe it won't, depending on what you have already learned, people out there listening, about this subject. But we're going to now start talking about, since we've been discussing the egg, the placenta, and how the placenta material has a long tradition in many different cultures that's vastly different than what we do with it now, which is treat it like biological hazardous waste in the hospital, but then it gets sold off to corporations to make shit like cosmetics and drugs and whatever. And we don't even know what happens to it. And so there's a lot to get into there with talking about the placenta, but just to like pull more symbolism out of this short passage about the Holy Grail, because my hypothesis here is that the Grail is the egg, is the placenta, is the blood or the life force energy that travels in the placenta. And it says the the music faded, the Grail passed. So does that mean it passed through the vesica Pisces, the portal, the vaginal cavity, right? Birth happens. The beam decayed. So is the beam the living tree? Is that like the umbilical cord, right? And from the walls, the rosy quiverings died into the night. Well, the placenta actually has a pulse when a baby is first born. It is pumping that blood back into the baby. It's all of that life force energy that it was storing and providing for baby is still connected to the baby and still trying to get into the baby. And I know you've done a lot of talking in the past. We even talked about it on InnerVerse before, about the cell salts, and how those 3 months that you're not in the womb represent like what you weren't completely built with, like that wasn't added to you properly. And I am contending that maybe, possibly, placenta actually holds those materials that your mother didn't quite get into you, or to some degree, and that by leaving umbilical cord attached and letting the baby absorb that, or maybe what some cultures do is they actually, the mother eats the placenta, and then the idea, like this is big in Eastern cultures and ancient China, the idea was that replenishes the lost blood and the nutrients or the life force that the mother lost from the birth process, from all the bleeding that happens, and allows the breast milk to be more nutritious to the baby and make the baby stronger. So I'm not saying I know the right way to handle or treat placenta, but what we do with it is absurd. And we're going to talk so much more about this. It's becoming like the main section.
In the animal kingdom, they say that placenta carries the information from every disease that family line has ever had.
Ancestral connection. Yes.
Every ancestral disease, all kinds of information. And this is from an animal. So you don't want, as an animal, you don't want other animals eating the placenta, despite how good it is for the mother. And the mother will typically, of most species, will go eat at least a portion of that.
Placentophagy.
You don't.
It's a real. It's like all mammals practically do it.
Right. And but what you don't want is other animals licking on it or eating it, because then they get wicked sick from it. And that's because it contains all this information, including a lot of disease information that that baby is going to be exposed to, that now it's basically pre-programming it for the things that it's going to meet now that it's in the world. And it's doing that in a way where the baby owns it now, because the baby's taking that in through its own digestive system, as opposed to taking it through the mother's blood. Now it's getting put through the digestive system, and it's being incorporated in an entirely different way. And that's going to help you set up your entire biome, which is your root mind. Everybody realizes that your stomach thinks for a lot of people. And so that's going to set that up and set up all the different things in that biome.
Yeah. There's also the spiritual side of placenta that I want to talk about more when we go further with it. That as a living being or a part of you that carries all of your DNA, that there's a very deep spiritual element here in terms of a consciousness element that we're very, very unwise, in my opinion, to disregard with the way that birth is done in the mainstream and in hospitals. Another way that placenta is sometimes handled by other tribes and cultures around the world, which I find very symbolic, like the Maori people in New Zealand are very adamant that the placenta must be buried in their homeland because it physically or spiritually connects the human being to the land. And when we look at how much of the whole Vatican maritime law, legal sorcery, all revolves around, like commercial code revolves around the law of the sea and having people be off the land and on paper in the papacy, and like there's so much to it, and using their finance systems and their banks and their currents of the right, like there's just all this water symbolism. And Mary, who we're just showing here, is mare in Latin, which is sea. Even in Japanese, the word maru means sea or mar, the root. It goes replete through many languages. And this is the sea of the amniotic fluid that you're floating in inside the egg, metaphorically. And we're going to talk there's more to say about placenta metaphors and stuff, but I think it's interesting that you've got tribes like Maori, which are way more fierce people, even though they're westernized to a large degree. You've seen some of their resistance to the cooties lockdowns happening in that part of the world. They're like, big groups of men, and they're ho ho, and they're like doing intimidating dances as a group, like warriors, right? And they are fighting to defend their land, where all the people in like Australia and the westernized countries, they're way less fierce about defending their land. I'll say that. No offense to the Australians or Canadians or Californians, but a lot of these people
it's part of why they've neutered men. It's part of why they've made violence into such a horrifying, scary thing, when the fact is violence is a very normal thing. It's not something that you should necessarily like just go start splaying all around, but there's all kinds of things that are violent that are absolutely normal. And if somebody is trespassing on your person, on your family, on your well-being, it's normal for you to react in a violent manner in order to stop that. And they have tried to then they've taken it all the way down to where, when I was a kid, it wasn't quite like this. But by the time my kids were in school, it didn't matter who started the fight. That didn't matter anymore. It only mattered if the only way you were going to not get in trouble is if you curled up in a little ball and waited for authorities to come stop this other kid from beating on you. And then then you are not going to get in trouble. So the ability to defend yourself even is frowned upon. You're just being violent, period. And it's insane. And they've turned it into where, absolutely. And now that they're the ones committing the violence on us, they're the ones doing things like, and I'm going to bring this up uh, just in the last moment, but they're the ones doing things like rounding up Aborigines and force vaccinating people that don't want it and claiming it's for their good. You're literally and forcing things into another people, chemicals that they don't want, that they don't believe in, and you can't prove has helped, has any efficacy, is any good, and the side effects are still being studied. So when you're the ones doing the nasty things, then it's not okay that you went and told everybody, all the men that you knew were going to stand up, you made sure that you neutered them and made sure there was nobody to stand up anymore. And that's sad and pathetic. And also sad and pathetic that we let it happen. So time to quit doing that. With that, bye-bye, YouTube.
Yeah, that's a good point to cut off with YouTube there. That's good. That's good, man.